For Chapter 3, we are going to be looking at department design and layout. Now, if you've ever been involved in the design of a new commercial kitchen, or even a personal kitchen, there's a lot of things that you have to consider. And we're going to briefly go over this. You could take an entire course over this, and really it's still hard to understand until you're really physically involved in this process or are working in a commercial kitchen. And once you kind of get in a new space, start working in a commercial kitchen, sometimes you'll realize some things that you wish were done differently. But we're going to look at some things to consider. So one major thing you have to consider is what type of items you're going to prepare. What does your menu look like? This is major. Are you frying a bunch of food? Maybe you need more than one fryer. If you don't really fry things, you probably don't need 4 fryers taking up a lot of space. So you really have to think about the type of food that you're going to prepare. How many people are you going to be preparing food for at once? Do you have special events, banquets, things like that that you may need space for in addition to what you're doing on a normal day-to-day basis? So all of those things dictate not only how much space you need, what kind of equipment you may need, how big that equipment is. So those are all things to keep in mind. Again, that goes to quantity as well. How much space do you have? What's your funding level? A lot of times space is fixed. In a dream world, we would all get a buildings from scratch, and you could decide how much space you need for the kitchen, and then it's designed around that. But a lot of times we have a certain area in the building, and that's what you have to work with. So you have to think about that when you're trying to determine the best use of space. How much money do you have to spend? A lot of times we have a small amount of money and we want to make big changes, so you have to think about what's the most efficient use of these funds, what's going to really make the biggest difference on a day-to-day basis for me and my staff. Some other things that we also think about are energy efficiency, and there's an article for you guys to read for that as one of your assignments. Ergonomic factors, job flow. How well does this make sense in terms of workflow, job safety? Even, ergonomic could be as simple as what height is your counter that you're asking people to work at? How is that going to affect back pain, injuries, things like that? Noise. What's the noise from your equipment? Do you need certain insulation? You don't want it to be super noisy in your dining room because of how your kitchen and dining room setup is combined. So make sure you think about that, as well as other things such as lighting, your HVAC system. How are you going to have safety and sanitation? That's definitely something to think about as well. Sometimes when areas are too close together, you don't want your trash area right next to your prep area. Or one I often see too is a lot of dishwashers. Those areas can be messy, they can spray all over. And if that's close to where food's being stored, etc., that can create a sanitation concern. You also want to think about security. Are there ways to control who has access to your kitchen, who has access to the food storage, etc.? Those are all things we want to think about when designing a physical layout. So let's start with receiving and storage. What are some things you might think about that? First of all, we want those close to one another. You don't want receiving to be at one end of the building and then where you're storing the food and supplies at the complete opposite end. So having those close together is really helpful. Storage is large enough to house your deliveries. How big of deliveries do you get at one time? Do you have room to store those safely? You also want these areas to be secure. Locked doors, people aren't able to get in it without your permission, etc. Other things I see people forget is where are you going to store your carts, dollies, things like that. You also may want to think about, in a storage area or a purchasing area, you may have some things that need to be done in there as far as divvying up items, etc. Do you need any workspace in that area that you're going to use to separate deliveries, etc.? So keep those things in mind as well. When you look at your food preparation area and service area, it's really important that those are well lit, easy to maneuver around. Again, appropriate for your type of meal service. If you have a tray line, you're going to need different setup and different space than if you have a restaurant style kitchen. So what does your meal service look like, and how does that play a role in what kind of equipment and facilities you need for your food preparation area? Again, space to store small equipment. Are you using food processors? Are you using stand mixers? What things like that do you need to have space to store? As well as pots, pans, those kind of things. One big thing, and this can be costly when trying to do renovations if you have to move these, but we want utility connections and ventilations to be put in the appropriate places. This is huge, especially when designing something from scratch, because if this is something that we mess up and want to change later, it can be very costly. And then do you have cashiers that you need space for? Do you have other employee functions that you need space for? Do you need stations for your servers to put in orders if you're going to more of a restaurant style operation? So what do you need that to look like? So make sure you keep those in mind when you're looking at those areas. Also think about, a lot of our long-term care facilities are trying to go to more personalized, smaller dining rooms. And so do you need to have multiple small dining rooms? Do you need to have some way within your big dining room facility that you can kind of subdivide it off to make it feel a little bit more homely, less distracting for your residents? And again, say that leads into our dining areas as well. Are those adequate for number of clients served? Do you have flow for staff to move about is really important. What's your atmosphere like? And that can go to design, decoration, color scheme, things like that. Is it suitable for the type of facility? Are you trying to serve fine dining food and it looks more like a fast food restaurant inside? So and again, sometimes we don't have that much control over that, but trying to make that a welcoming, and like I said, a lot of places are going to try more restaurant home style layouts of these, so keep that in mind. If you're in a long-term care facility, you also have to think about any specialized equipment. Do you need more room at these tables because you may need people to assist the residents in feeding? So maybe you have 100 residents for lunch, but maybe you need more than 100 chairs because several of them have an individual who's going to sit next to them at lunch to help them feed. Maybe you have special dining carts, other kinds of special wheelchairs, other kinds of equipment that you need to make sure you have space for. Sometimes places will have like a cart that they take around with fresh fruits and vegetables, or maybe they have a dessert cart or things like that. You need to make sure that you have room to move that around your facility. So some other important principles to think about. We want to make sure adequate space is allocated for each area. And if you're looking at figure 23.1 in your book, that gives you an estimate of in a 4,000 square foot traditional kitchen, how much you may have for each space. So they have about 3% for receiving, about 28% for storage, 27.5% for preparation, 11.5% for cooking, 20% for serving, and almost 10% for cleaning up, so dish room, things like that. This is just an estimate. Again, we've talked about all those other things influence whether or not you're going to need more space for serving or more space for prep, depending on what your menu type looks like. So just keep those in mind. You also have fixed space, things like office space. You also may need, restrooms, lounge areas, bathrooms, things like that you also need to think about as well. And they really recommend seek employee input when possible. A lot of your employees may have worked in this facility for even longer than you have. And so they may have some good insight onto what works, what doesn't work. And that's a good idea to get some more notions that you've never thought about. So asking your employees can be really helpful. And it also gives them a sense of ownership as well. So what are some basic steps when you're looking for equipment? So we talked about the capital budget and large purchase equipment, but what do you do? So the first thing you're going to do is determine your need. What is your need for that? And that's not just like we need a dishwasher. What kind of dishwasher do we need? Are we changing how many, are we getting ready to add a new wing on to the hospital, so now we're going to need a much larger dishwasher? What is going on in your facility at this time? What's your budget? So obviously you have to think about that. And you can also look at your budget items, and sometimes facilities may have other money within that facility that if to a need and you don't have, and you can prove that it will be better off in the long run to get something that's maybe a little bit more expensive, not quite in your budget, but maybe it has much less operating and maintenance costs, talk to your administrators of your facility. Sometimes they're able to find that money even if it's not directly allocated in that capital budget. Investigate what your options are. What's out there? What type of facilities or what type of equipment can you find for these dishwashers? What are the price points? What are the materials we need? Even things like, what kind of material costs do these have? What are the maintenance costs? How do I install them? All those things are important to think about. Consulting with others can be a great tool. So, talk to other people in the industry, other members of the ANFP, other areas and facilities like yours near you, and ask them what they've done. That can give you some insight, kind of maybe they had that equipment that you're looking at and they didn't like it. And maybe they went to something else they like better, so keep that in mind. Again, price quotes are the next step. A lot of times it will be difficult to really find a price online for some of these equipment. A lot of times you have to specifically request a quote. They don't necessarily want to divulge that information to the public. Again, then you're going to prepare budget requests, make decision. Depending on who that needs to go to in your organization. And you may then award a bid and order. And so, if you're starting to look at bids, you may ask several price quotes. That way then you can decide what really fits best into your budget as well. Make sure you're finding a reputable supplier. That's really important, even if you can get it sometimes a little bit cheaper from a supplier that's not well known or doesn't have good maintenance services after the fact. It may be worth, in some cases, paying a little bit more for someplace that's going to give you a good warranty, a good preventative maintenance plan with that. So look at all of those things when you consider purchase price. So some things you have to consider. On figure 23.2, you can look at some approval agencies as well. So there's several groups that will approve food service equipment to make sure that these equipment pieces that you're looking at meet the needs of materials, design, performance, sanitation. So those can help you know that, hey, this has been approved for use in a commercial operation. But some things to think about. How easy is it to operate? Am I going to have to do a whole bunch of training for my staff? Is it difficult to operate? Do I need someone with a special skill set to use it? Or is it pretty easy to learn? What's the durability? How long do these normally last? What warranty is provided? What safety concerns do you have? What are the specifications on that as well? And some things you need to look at with specs are what kind of power does it need? Are we going to have to upgrade our power systems, our ventilation systems, or is what we have adequate with these current recommendations for this facility? How much does it hold? Does it meet your needs as far as size of the equipment? So keep all those things in mind when you're comparing specs. Compatibility with existing equipment is also really important. Especially if you have pieces of equipment that kind of work in conjunction with each other. You want to make sure that will continue to happen and you don't have to replace two pieces of equipment when you really only wanted to replace one. And then obviously price is a major factor, as well as operating cost. And that's really important because that could be the cost of energy, the supplies, some things like that can be really expensive. So you want to make sure you're really looking at that when you figure out what the overall price is. One may look cheaper, but you're going to spend $5,000 more a year in supplies for it than you would have for the other one. So it really may not be cheaper in the long run. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these new equipments as well. Again, this gives more information on that equipment specifications that you may need to look at. So that's the detailed description, providing information needed to purchase the piece of equipment. Again, the size of the equipment, the number of meals served, what kind of technology is used, what training of user needs to happen, how does that happen? A lot of these companies will come in and actually provide the training, so that's great. Energy needs, space needed, and this is a big one. I've seen lots of people maybe not think this through and order a piece of equipment and then realize it doesn't fit in the space that they have allocated for it. Obviously, that's a major problem. So keep all of that in mind when you're looking at, what specs of this should we be using? If you look at figure 23.5, that gives you some more information on what to look at. Their example is a convection oven. So if you're looking at convection oven, what's the use? What are the dimensions of this? So for here, this is the specs they're putting out for what they want to look for. So they're looking for a floor model double stack convection oven. It's going to be used for hot food preparation for muffins, roasts, casseroles, potatoes, etc. It must fit in a 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot area, a maximum height of 70 inches. Gas connection, you can see capacity 10 inches by 26 inch pans. They want it to have stainless steel front, sides, and top. Auto ignition, again, 3-year parts and labor warranty. Delivery installation they want to be provided, and they want that one-time training to be provided by the manufacturer and group that's selling you this equipment. So all of those things can be put into practice when you're designing a spec that you can then send out, hey, here's what we're looking for, what would that quote be that you're going to give me on that? Figure 23.6 also talks about common equipment training needs. So that's something that you may want to look at as well. And sometimes we find that, it's really interesting, we've gotten to some conferences and gotten a lot of debates about this, that a lot of times people are using equipment and they've been doing this piece of equipment for 3 years, and then someone will come show you, oh, if you just do this simply, it makes it a lot easier. They're like, I wish someone would have showed me that. And I've had a couple examples this year at conferences and some of the culinary arenas at that. So make sure that we are training our individuals on this and that we're getting trained on all of the features, because a lot of the equipment now has a lot of time-saving features that we can use, but they're not always that self-explanatory. We may need to be trained on them, so keep that in mind. When we're maintaining our equipment, it's really important to participate in preventative maintenance, an organized routine of cleaning, inspecting, and maintaining equipment. So this preventative maintenance is really important to prevent problems from coming up as much as we can in the future. We can do this on a maintenance schedule. So having a schedule that looks at, not everything needs to be maintained every week, every month, but some may. Some things you may need to look at once a week. Some things you may need to look at once a month. Some things every 6 months, something will need to be done with them. So having that schedule can ensure this is done on time. Making sure employees are trained properly, like we talked about. A cleaning schedule can be really important as well. Just like a preventative maintenance schedule, having that cleaning schedule can ensure things get cleaned like they should. A lot of times we have things that are cleaned daily, right? When things are cleaned daily, it's easy to know if someone didn't do it every day. But certain things that you maybe only need to do once a month, well, maybe it's middle of, September and we're like, did anyone do it in August? Have we done it in September yet? I don't know. It can be a little bit confusing, and so we really want to make sure that we have a schedule, both with preventative maintenance and cleaning, to ensure that things get done on time, especially the things that we don't do daily, because those are often the easiest to forget. And you really want to make sure, last thing, that the cost of supplies is often involved in maintaining equipment. What chemical products do you need? Cleaning supplies, things like that. So make sure you are looking at that. How expensive is the cleaning agent? How often are we going to need to replace this? And making sure we're doing that properly, because if we're not going to be able to pay to maintain it, then maybe that's not the right piece of equipment for us. So keep all those things in mind when looking at this. This is a great chapter in your book. I hope you read through that. Again, until you're really in that situation, it's kind of a learn-as-you-go process for those of you who've designed a kitchen. This can give you a lot of things to think about. And talk to your managers where you work. Talk to other staff in the industry. I encourage, when you go do your dietary manager practicum, to ask about this kind of stuff. This is something that you'll learn a lot from individuals who have experience doing this in our industry. Thanks, guys.